can't believe this was me. That's about 55 years ago. I was only about 27 years old. Absolutely no makeup. This was me at the age of 21. This is my son, Rusty. He was about a year old. I was living at my parents' home in Hammond, Indiana, and my husband was in the Navy deployed to Japan. This was me at the age of about 25 and with my first husband, the father of my children. He was a good man who was good to me, but he had a drinking problem. So I really needed some kind of help. I didn't know anything about the Lord. Well, the drinking continued, and one day his brother came over, and they went out drinking, and they were in a very bad car accident. My husband was the passenger, and the front seat was pushed into the back seat. They hit a telephone pole. The bone came out of his thigh, compound fracture. He was put into a body cast and eventually came home. We had a hospital bed in the living room, and I took care of him, and my daughter was in diapers and Rusty was little. So I think it was like right after this, not long after this photo was taken, that this happened. He was working at Youngstown Sheet and Tube, and one of the men, an older man, he was probably not old, but we thought he was at that time, but he worked at the mill with my husband, and he began visiting him in the hospital. And after he got home from the hospital, he continued to visit, and he began to share the Lord with us. And I think I was even a little argumentative. I didn't know nothing about the Lord, but I really was hungry. I remember picking up the Bible, and I didn't even know how to begin. I didn't know there was an Old Testament or New Testament or anything. But he continued and continued working with us. He was so patient, so loving, and so kind. And he just won us over. Well, I was really lonely. I didn't have any friends. I was married at 18 years old, and my husband came home from the Navy, and we just lived a quiet life, and it seemed like I was just totally involved with my children and keeping my home. I loved to decorate and cook and all the little homey things. I was very domesticated. In those days, we all were basically. We were really career people. And my whole life revolved around my husband. Everything. So when, the times, and I mean, I know he dearly loved me, so this had nothing to do with it. He just had a problem. But I can remember just waiting for him to come home. That's a big deal for me, because he was my whole life. For him to come home for dinner. And I loved to cook, and I'd have the house cleaned and a meal on the table, and then I have to make excuses to the children, and then it was the long hours, half the night, sitting and looking out the window for him. So I was just so hungry for answers and knowing the Lord. So Clarence invited us to church. Bill may have gone. maybe, I don't really know, a couple times, something like that. I'm not sure. But he just couldn't seem to give up the drinking. So I got very involved in the church. In fact, I taught Sunday school there for about 11 years. And they built another church later. But it was my reprieve to go to church. And it was church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I believe Friday night. And it ended up with my children going to the school there. They started to school. So I was totally involved in the church. And he had no problem with it at all. He would have periods of being sober, and we would fight, and I would leave him. I'd threaten to leave him. I would pray, I would cry, I would plead, I would get angry. I mean, if you've ever lived with it, you know. And the vomiting after he comes home and trying to keep him away from the children. So all of this was hidden. I hid this from the kids. But the church that I went to, boy, I always really started this whole video. The church I went to was a Holiness church, meaning you couldn't cut your hair, you couldn't color your hair, you couldn't cut your bangs. My hair never did grow real long. I mean, it did when I was younger, but that period of time it didn't. So it wasn't extremely long, but some of the people were very long, past their waist. And most of the ladies wore their hair in a bun or an updo. Well, this period of time was where they had, and you older ladies like me will remember, we had the big updos. The bigger, the better. Oh my goodness. And one of the girls in the church who's gone on to be with the Lord at a young age, her name was Lorna. She used to do a lot of our ladies' hair. And we would use hair pieces to go in with our hair, or she would rat our hair and put things in our hair to make it bigger. And then once the hair was done, it had to stay that way for at least a week. And it was very hard to sleep on because you were so careful and you're full of bobby pins and stuff. Oh my goodness. But they had all these things you couldn't do. You couldn't wear makeup, so I wore makeup all my life. And I usually had my hair cut, now some of the pictures I don't have it there, but my hair was cut short and it was blonde. And I wore makeup, and I wore jeans, and I wore shorts. But I couldn't have jewelry now, and I couldn't have makeup. And you couldn't have, you had to have long sleeves. You couldn't have a TV if you were a Sunday school teacher. At least you couldn't watch it if your husband wasn't born again, or he didn't go to church. Well, they understood you had a TV then, but you weren't supposed to really watch it. I think you weren't supposed to go bowling or dancing. It was, you're like, what could we do? Well, we ate. We ate and went to church. But, it didn't bother me. I did miss the pants, but I didn't think about it because I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know anything. And they were so loving. And now Clarence introduced me to his daughter-in-law, Beulah. Hi, Beulah. And we were the same age. And Beulah was just the most loving, and still is, one of the most loving people you've ever seen. And she was so cute. And she would call me on the phone. We weren't close enough to buddy up like that often. But I would see her at church all the time. And I wanted to fit in. And I can remember taking my jewelry box Not that I had anything expensive, wouldn't have much money. But I had probably most of them my mother gave to me. I can remember going out to the alley where the garbage can was, taking my jewelry box and just dumping it into the can. I can't remember throwing the pants out, but I had to have. I didn't have any shorts or anything like that. And I know I didn't have the money to be buying a bunch of clothes, but I think I went to like Salvation Army or something and bought dresses. And you could have skirts or dresses. Or the most casual thing you could have was when, if you remember this, jean skirts or culottes. Oh yeah, we were really happy when those came in. You know, because you could be a little more athletic. Well, at least with the culottes. So, I don't know. I remember going to church when I first started, and I didn't have the proper dresses with the long sleeves. And I had on what they called a shirt dress. And it was just a full on the bottom with a belted waist, collar, but it was sleeveless. And I remember one lady in the church who was really into the strictness. And she came up to me and put her finger kind of under my sleeve and kind of flipped it up and handed me a tract. And then she walked away. And I was sitting next to Beulah. I remember looking at Beulah like, why did she give me this? What is this? And she goes, didn't you notice? And I'm like, what? And she goes, everybody has sleeves on. Nobody wears sleeveless dresses. And I'm like, oh. And I wasn't offended. I tell you, I just would do anything. I just love the Lord. Oh my goodness. Okay, hold on, I got more. Well, thought I'd try to do a little more here before I leave. I have an appointment. Well, I stayed in the church for, as I said, 11 years. And I had a younger sister who I decided to bring her to church. So she was probably about 13 years old. She stayed in the church, grew to be a teenager. She was 13, but it grew to be an adult there. But she met, remember I talked about Claire and Jones' daughter-in-law, Beulah? Well, Beulah had her cousin's children that she was bringing to the church. So they grew up there too. So it was her second cousin. His name was, one of them was Tim. So she brought Tim to church, and Tim met my sister, Debbie. So it was my sister and her second cousin. They ended up getting married and are married now and grandparents. In fact, that little girl that you've seen in one of my videos who was a weightlifter, that's their granddaughter. So my life was very involved there. But my husband was still drinking. And of course, Debbie and Tim, they're growing up there and meeting other young couples and very involved in the church, which I was happy about. But I couldn't really get involved with any friendships with people in the church as far as with couples because, you know, my husband wasn't going to church. So now I want to tell you some of why I left the church, but I am not upset or mad or anything else about what happened because my pastor at that time, he's no longer with us. I just loved him. He had this booming voice and just an authority about him. And he really believed in the holiness standards because he was raised in it. If I'm not mistaken, from the time he was a baby, he was raised in it. So everything that he was trying to teach us, he thought was correct to the point of almost salvation. You had to do this. So and I know he loved me, and I loved him. I mean, his whole family. In fact, one of his sons was one of the Sunday school teachers in my class. But time was going on, and one day I was cleaning up my Sunday school class. And my pastor asked me to step out into the vestibule. And I did, and he said, Sandy, close your eyes a minute. And of course I did, you know, and I closed my eyes, and he said, do you have eyeshadow on? And I had it was like a very almost flesh color beige, tiny bit. I don't know why I dared to do that, right? And he wouldn't, only way he'd know is if somebody told him. He wouldn't have known that. So he says, do you have eyeshadow on? And I said, a little bit. And he said, I knew it. Sweet little Sandy praying for her husband. I knew there was a reason that God wasn't answering your prayers. And you know, that's when it really, I don't know, something about that. And I said, Pastor, do you really believe that God doesn't hear my prayers because of this little bit of eyeshadow? And he goes, if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here. So I can't remember how our conversation ended. No, there was no arguments about it or anything, but I remember I went home, and I think for like 3 days I mulled over this. I forgot to put my speakers on, guys. So sorry. I'm trying to do this because I have to be leaving. But anyways, I went home, as I said, and I kept like thinking about this, and I said to my husband, who was still drinking, this is off and on thing all the time, but it was getting worse. And I thought, you know, maybe if I was in a church that didn't have all these holiness standards, maybe he would go to church with me. So I said to him, his name was Bill too. I'm married to a Bill now too. So I was married to a Bill, then a Larry, and then a Bill again now. So, and I said to him, if I left the church I'm in now, would you go to another church with me, a different church? And he hesitated a minute and he said, probably not. But still, I had this time a little bit on television, watched some Christian programs. And I know you guys will laugh at this if you know who it is, but like with Tammy Faye Baker. And I was very confused because she talk about makeup. Bless her heart. Tammy just had these great big eyelashes, false eyelashes, and all this makeup. And she had come out of a Holiness church also. So when they get out from under the law, sometimes they go the total opposite. I think the law does that sometimes, you know. And I remember seeing her, but I would see her talking about the Lord and she would cry. And I remember sitting in front of the television and I go, Lord, I'm so confused because my spirit agrees with her spirit. In other words, you know, I knew she loved the Lord. Whatever, I know all the other stuff, but I believe and still believe that Tammy loved the Lord. And I don't believe she's going to hell. So God, just people who aren't, I don't know anything about the word really. So people who don't believe exactly, because there were other beliefs there too. People who don't believe exactly like this are like, we're the only ones that are going to make it? What about these people? I could tell she loves the Lord. I was just so confused. And that all happened, I don't know, probably during that time. After this, I'm not sure. And I thought, if I leave the church, my sister and her husband are going to leave. I don't know what's going to happen to them if I leave. And there was another couple there that were around Debbie and Tim's age, and oh yeah, I can say their name. And I was afraid they would leave. Well, they did. I left. My sister and her husband left. And the other couple left too. Now, that's a whole kind of different story. Now, I'm terrified about leaving. I felt like a nun, and you leave the convent. And I just I couldn't do any confrontation. I couldn't talk to the pastor. I couldn't do that. I'm not good at confrontation or stuff like that. I just want to leave and not say anything. Just get it over with. So I was always afraid that phone would ring and it would be my pastor. So I can remember that the phone did ring and my husband answered it. And he's mouthing to me who it is, kind of silently. And I'm like, and I was so scared. I remember running out the back door and into the back, and there was a little porch off of the garage, and I ran in there and I was like, oh my God, you know. And so he talked to the pastor on the phone. And so then after a while he came out there where I was sitting, my husband did, and he says, he wants to talk to you. And I go, no, he does. And then he goes, no, I'm just kidding you. I talked to him and I go, what did he say? He says, you know, Bill, that she's going to divorce you if she leaves the church. Which is what happened, to be honest with you. And I have to break it up here because I have to leave and I'll pick it up later. As time went on and the children grew into teenagers, the drinking by this time had gotten so bad, I had to make a decision because he was pulling my children into the drinking. And I had fought for a long time to keep the marriage together. I was a Christian, about the time I had to make this decision. And I didn't believe in divorce, but I had to do it.